Hello everyone, this is Shlok, and today we are covering a rather serious topic because 24th of February marked 3 years since the Russia-Ukraine war began. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down that conflict from the ground up and to the point, exactly what you need for your upcoming MBA interviews. We'll start with the historical context, track key developments, and finally tackle the questions you might face, including India's stance on the war. So let's get straight into it. So the first question that can be asked is, what are the key reasons behind the Russia-Ukraine war? And for this, we need a quick history lesson. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union until 1991. Now, what is the Soviet Union in one line? The Soviet Union is essentially a communist state, that ended in 1991. Now, why are they at odds with the Western Bloc or the United States? That is because they have ideological differences, or they used to have ideological differences, because Soviet Union was a communist state, whereas the Western countries, they are of the capitalist ideology. So because of that ideological gap, these two states have never really seen eye to eye. Coming back to our story, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union until 1991, and Russia viewed Ukraine as a part of its sphere of influence. The second reason for the war is that Russia sees Ukraine's potential NATO membership. So Ukraine wants to enter NATO, and its potential NATO membership Russia sees as a security threat. Now, quick primer on NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as the full form goes, is a military alliance of 32 countries that was formed in the year 1949. And the main idea behind this is that it provides collective defense to all its countries against external threats. So what happens is, if Ukraine joins the NATO, it becomes a problem for Russia, because the Western forces are now essentially at the doorstep of Russia, and that creates a security threat for Russia. And that is the reasoning behind Russia not wanting Ukraine to join NATO. One crucial story that we must be aware of surrounding this topic is the fact that Russia was removed, or they were suspended from the G8. Now, what is the G8? G8 are essentially the eight biggest economies of the world, most powerful economies of the world. That is what the G8 is. That Russia was essentially removed from the G8 after this annexation, because the other countries stated that this annexation is a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. Hence the G8 became the G7, and this is a very, very important fact for us to know about. Let's move on to the year 2022, where a major escalation in the conflict took place. So Russia, this is the date, 24th of February 2022, when Russia ended up invading Ukraine. And to this date, by this date, about 20% of Ukraine's territory is now under the occupation of Russia. So that is one very important fact for us to know about. In addition to that, I also wanted to discuss what happened right after this conflict. USA and Europe imposed sanctions on Russia, as well as Russian assets abroad were frozen by the Western countries. Now, what are these economic sanctions? Sanctions, in bare bones terms, it is a move by countries to isolate Russia economically and essentially not buy their products or reduce buying their products in order to cripple their economy. Now, what does that do? If a state does not have money in order to fund its war, they won't be able to keep on attacking Ukraine. So that was the idea behind imposing economic sanctions on Russia. Now let's come on to the most interesting and important part of the video, which is what are the latest news surrounding this conflict. And again, the elephant in the room here is Donald Trump and his increasing receptiveness towards Putin. What are the signs that this has been the case recently? I'm saying that they've become closer than ever, but why am I saying this? Trump, in his statements on Truth Social, he said that Zelensky is a dictator. And when he was asked about his stance on the Russian president, who actually is a dictator, who is actually not been democratically elected, on that he chose to not say anything negative. So that is the first aspect that tells us about the increasing closeness of the United States and Russia. Additionally, US also sided with Russia in the UN resolutions on Ukraine. So that is an enormous thing, especially considering the fact that US could have maintained a balanced approach like India did, but instead the US chose to consciously support Russia. So that is the second most important thing that we should know about. The next part I wanted to cover is, what is this Ukraine minerals deal all about that has been in the news lately? Think of it as a business deal. Ukraine gives up its rare earth minerals in return for US protection. Very straightforward. Zelensky first came up with this idea, but Donald Trump took it too far. He said US should get minerals worth $500 billion. So that is a ridiculously huge ask. But recently, there seems to have been some progress in this particular realm where Donald Trump has said that Zelensky is coming to the United States maybe a couple of weeks from now in order to sign this deal. Now that we've covered the latest news surrounding this, let's jump on to India and what is it that the MBA interviewers could ask us surrounding this question. A key question could be, what is India's take on this particular conflict? And India maintains a non-aligned path as something that we have done historically. They do not actively criticize Russia, and they also push peace talks. So they do not actively say that they are siding with Ukraine or with Russia, but at the same time they are on the side of peace, is what is the stance of New Delhi on this particular topic. In addition to that, the next question could be that what effect has the war had on Indian economy and the stock markets? And you'd estimate that initially the impact of was negative, and you'd be right. In February, March 2022, when the war began, Indian stock markets plummeted. They dropped sharply due to global uncertainty. The Sensex and the Nifty saw a 5 to 6% drop initially, but recovered as the global market stabilized. But in the long run, I need you to understand that we saw cheaper oil, we saw trade diversification, we saw economic resilience. And this I can substantiate with the fact that our economic growth of the year 2023-2024, our economic growth, our GDP growth was close to 8.2%, one of the highest growth rates that we have seen in a very long time. So that economic growth goes to show the fact that we weren't negatively impacted. We only came out stronger after this crisis hit the world. One more question that can be asked is, what are the kind of lessons India can learn from this war in terms of military and economic strategy? So the first one that comes to mind is the fact that India should have a greater reliance in terms of greater defense, a greater self-reliance in terms of defense. Now, why is that? The first reason for that is heavy reliance on any particular country can be risky during conflicts, because Russia would first prioritize their own defense needs. Only then they would supply us with defense equipment. And the second thing is, India must boost domestic defense production as well and diversify its suppliers. So that is the first future lesson that we have. The second lesson that India can learn is the fact that we need to make the rupee more international. We need to reduce our dependency on the US dollar, because when economic sanctions were imposed on Russia, they were effectively cut off from the global banking system. And this goes to show that excessive dependence on any one particular currency can be devastating for the economy. And if we have our own standards, if our local currencies are accepted across the globe, that makes us one step closer to achieving our dream of a developed India by the year 2047. So that's the second lesson that we can learn. All right, so that's a little bit from my side. The next developments I want you to follow is what's going to happen in the Zelensky and Trump meeting that's going to be happening at the White House anytime now. In addition to that, I also want you to look into what is happening in other parts of the globe in terms of Israel and the Palestinian conflict. So that is another one of those aspects that we need to look into. With that said, that's a little bit from my side. I hope you got to learn from this something from this video. And if you could subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. With that said, that's a little bit from my side, and bye bye.